There I stood, frozen in the doorway, watching my boyfriend of 3 months, Ethan Miller, passionately kissing my future daughter-in-law, Elena, in what was supposed to be the staging kitchen of the house, a house that was hosting my son's wedding in 2 short hours. I immediately snapped a picture and sent it to my son with the text, "Get to the kitchen now." When David came running and saw the scene, he just smiled and whispered, "Easy, Mom. I know everything. The payback starts in 5 minutes. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop your location in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe." But let me tell you how I got to this moment. My name is Carla Hayes. I'm 54 years old. And until 3 months ago, I was a respectable widow who had spent 5 years mourning my late husband, Robert. 5 years of grieving, turning down invitations, living like a nun, because that's what was expected of a good, devoted widow. Everything changed when I met Ethan Miller at the local upscale grocery store. He was 58, a widower himself, sophisticated, with that smile that just makes you forget you have responsibilities. He worked as a VP at a construction firm, drove a nice car, and most importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in me as a woman, not just as someone's mother. The first 2 months felt like living in a romantic movie. Candlelit dinners, strolls along the waterfront park, flowers every Friday. Ethan made me feel young again, desired. After 5 years of feeling invisible, it was intoxicating to have a man look at me like I was the only woman in the world. My son, David, 31, seemed happy about my new relationship. "Mom, you deserve to be happy," he told me. His fiancée, Elena, whom he'd been with for 2 years, was also enthusiastic. Too enthusiastic now that I think about it. She was always asking about Ethan, wanting details of our dates, even suggesting we invite him over for dinner more often. The wedding was planned as an intimate celebration at David's home. Elena had insisted it be there, saying she wanted something familiar and cozy. I had contributed a considerable amount toward the celebration, happy to see my son so in love. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early to help with the last-minute prep. Elena was nervous, which was normal, but there was something odd about her behavior. She kept glancing at her phone, smiling strangely. When I asked if she was okay, she just said she had a lot of surprises planned for today. Ethan had arrived an hour before me, supposedly to help set up the chairs. I was in the backyard arranging flowers when I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. I figured it was normal, people getting ready for the celebration, but something about those laughs unsettled me. They were too intimate, too complicit. I decided to go grab a glass of water. The kitchen door was slightly ajar. What I saw froze me. Ethan had Elena pinned against the counter, his hands on her waist, kissing her like the world was about to end. Elena was reciprocating the kiss with a passion she had never shown in public with my son. My first instinct was to scream, to make a scene, but something stopped me. Maybe it was years of experience handling family crises, or maybe it was the sheer shock. But instead of exploding, I pulled out my phone and took 3 perfect photos. Then I just stood there, waiting, watching my boyfriend and my future daughter-in-law behaving like secret lovers. When they finally pulled apart, I heard them speaking in low tones. After the ceremony, Ethan was saying, "We can tell David the truth. He'll understand." Elena chuckled nervously. "I don't know if I'm ready to hurt him like that." "Sweetheart," he replied, "we can't keep pretending forever." That's when I understood. This wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment betrayal. It was a plan, a conspiracy, and my poor son had no idea his wedding was actually an elaborate sham. It was then that I sent the message to David with the photo, and when he came running and saw the scene I'd been observing, his reaction completely threw me off. Instead of shock or pain, David smiled with a composure that frightened me. "Easy, Mom," he whispered in my ear. "I know everything. The payback starts in 5 minutes. What was happening here? How could my son be so calm? And more importantly, what kind of payback did he have planned for his own wedding day?" My son took my arm with a gentleness that completely contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. "Mom, come with me to the study. We need to talk before the show starts." His words sent a chill down my spine. A show? What was he talking about? As we walked toward the back of the house, I couldn't stop thinking about the absurdity of the situation. Here I was, dressed in my elegant navy suit. that I'd chosen especially for my son's wedding, following him as if we were having a casual chat about the weather, when I'd just discovered his fiancée was cheating on him with my boyfriend. "David," I whispered as he opened the door to his small office, "how can you be so calm? Did you see the photos? Elena and Ethan are—" "Mom," he interrupted, closing the door behind us. "I've known about their affair for 2 months." He sat on the edge of his desk with an unsettling calmness. "In fact, I'm the one who encouraged it." My jaw dropped, literally, like one of those dramatic ladies in a soap opera, except this was my real life and my son had apparently gone crazy. "What did you just say?" David opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "Elena has been stealing money from me for 6 months, Mom. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. I thought she had financial problems, and I confronted her, but she denied everything. So I decided to investigate." He opened the folder and showed me bank statements, photographs, printed text messages. My head started spinning as I processed what I was seeing. Transfers from David's account to an account I didn't recognize. Photos of Elena at expensive restaurants with a man who wasn't my son. Messages where she talked about idiot David and that stupid mom of his who I kind of like. "Idiot?" I murmured, feeling the rage start to replace the shock. "That stupid mom of his who I kind of like?" "Oh, that's nothing compared to what she says about you when she talks to Ethan." David flipped through some pages until he reached a transcript of messages that made me see red. Elena described our conversations as boring chats with the old lady, and there were several comments about how Carla is so naive, she believes everything I tell her. I felt the floor move beneath my feet. "How did you get this?" Turns out Elena isn't very tech savvy. She uses the same password for everything, and we share a Netflix account. David smiled with a chilling coolness I didn't recognize in my son. "I also installed monitoring software on her laptop after I found the first suspicious transfers. Is this legal?" "Probably not entirely, but considering she was systematically robbing me, let's just say we're in a gray area." He stood up and walked toward the window. What I discovered was much worse than I expected. Elena wasn't just stealing from me, Mom. She was planning to divorce me immediately after the wedding to take half of my assets. My brain struggled to process this information. "And Ethan?" Your dear Ethan." David laughed, but it was a humorless sound. "He met Elena 4 months ago at a bar. She told him about her plan. He saw an opportunity to get easy money, and they decided to work together. The plan was for him to woo you, marry you quickly, and then they would both file for divorce simultaneously to maximize their gains." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. They were going to marry me just for money? "Mom, I checked Ethan's financials. He's on the hook for major debt. His company filed for bankruptcy. He lost his house 6 months ago and owes money to people who aren't exactly forgiving." David handed me more papers. "Elena told him how much money you have saved, how much the house Dad left you is worth. Everything." My hands were shaking as I looked at the documents. Unpaid bills, foreclosure notices, credit reports, showing a complete financial disaster. The man who had been courting me with flowers and romantic dinners was essentially ruined. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" I asked, feeling tears start to sting my eyes. "Because I needed solid evidence, Mom. And because—" He walked over and took my hands. "I wanted you to see for yourself who these people really are. If I had told you, you would have confronted Ethan. He would have denied everything, and Elena would have found a way to manipulate the situation. But your wedding—" "There won't be a wedding, Mom. Or rather, there will be a very different wedding than the one Elena imagines." David looked at his watch. "In 3 minutes, Elena will find out I canceled our joint bank account this morning. In 5 minutes, she'll receive a call from the bank informing her that the check for the dress bounced. And in 10 minutes, He broke off as we heard a scream from the kitchen. "David, David, get in here." David smiled. And there it is, phase 1 of the plan in action. "How many phases are there?" I asked, still trying to process everything. "Oh, Mom." David hugged me, and for the first time in this crazy conversation, I recognized my son in his smile. "We're just getting started." Elena's scream echoed through the house as if she'd been stabbed. David and I exchanged glances, and I could see the barely contained satisfaction in his eyes. "Mom, I want you to watch this, but I need you to trust me and not intervene. No matter what happens, okay? I nodded, although part of me wondered if my son had turned into a psychopath over the last 2 months. We left the study just as Elena appeared in the hallway, phone in one hand and an expression of utter panic on her face. David, there's a problem with the bank. They said you canceled our account. Her voice rose in pitch with every word. And the dress? The boutique just called me saying the check bounced. David adopted a perfectly confused expression. I had to admit my son had inherited my acting skills. What? That's impossible, sweetheart. It must be a bank error. It's not an error. Elena was on the verge of hysterics. Call the bank right now. The wedding starts in an hour and a half. It was at that moment that Ethan appeared from the kitchen, clearly oblivious to the drama unfolding. Seeing me, his face lit up with that smile that used to melt me and now made me nauseous. Carla, my love, you look beautiful. He approached to kiss me on the cheek, and I had to use all my willpower not to pull away. Is everything okay here? I heard screaming. Elena looked at him with a mixture of panic and warning. It was obvious they didn't want their financial problems discussed in front of me. After all, they still needed to keep up appearances until their plan was complete. Everything's fine, Ethan, David said with a supernatural calm. Just a little misunderstanding with the bank. Elena, why don't we call the bank together from my office? I'm sure we can resolve this quickly. Elena's face visibly relaxed. Yes, please, it must just be a stupid mistake. As David and Elena disappeared into the office, I was left alone with Ethan in the hallway. He took my hand and brought it to his lips in a gesture that used to seem romantic and now seemed repulsive. Carla, I wanted to take this moment to tell you something important. His eyes held the intensity he used when he wanted to be convincing. I've been thinking a lot about us and yes, I managed to say, forcing a smile. I think we should make this official soon. Very soon. His hand squeezed mine. Life is short, and when you find the right person, there's no point in waiting. How convenient, I thought. He needs to marry me quickly before I discover the truth. Oh, Ethan, isn't it a bit soon? Not at all, my love. I'm 58. You're 54. We're not kids. We know what we want. He moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, mixed with something I now recognized as desperation. I've been thinking we could get married next month. Next month? My voice went up an octave without my being able to control it. I know it sounds rushed, but Carla, I love you, and I want to start our life together as soon as possible. He was operating at full speed now, pressuring me exactly as David had predicted he would. We could do something simple, intimate. We don't need a big celebration like this one. From the office, we could hear Elena's voice escalating again. This can't be happening. Call the bank manager. Call whoever you need to call. Ethan frowned, clearly worried that Elena's drama might interfere with his own manipulation. Poor Elena. Wedding jitters, I suppose. I suppose, I repeated, watching his eyes dart toward the office door. He was calculating, planning his next move. Ethan, what do you know about Elena's finances? The question caught him by surprise. Her finances? Nothing. Why? It's just that I lowered my voice as if sharing a secret. Well, she seems very stressed about money. I wonder if she and David are having financial trouble. Ethan shrugged, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. I don't think so, Carla. David has a good job, right? Yes, but lately, I lowered my voice as if sharing a secret. I've noticed Elena asked a lot of questions about my financial situation, about the house, the investments Robert left me. Ethan's eyes lit up with interest, confirming exactly what David had suspected. Really? How strange. It's probably just curiosity, I continued, enjoying this little game more than I should. Although she specifically asked me how much the house was worth and if I planned to sell it anytime soon. How interesting. Ethan was no longer paying attention to the shouts coming from the office. He was completely focused on the information I was accidentally revealing. And what did you tell her? The truth, that the house is worth about $2.5 million, and I don't plan to sell it unless I get married and my husband and I decide to move into something bigger. I could practically see dollar signs dancing in his eyes. Carla, my love. She's doing this on purpose. Elena's scream from the office interrupted what I'm sure would have been a very urgent marriage proposal. Ethan and I turned toward the office just as the door burst open and Elena stormed out, with David following her with a perfectly acted, confused expression. "Elena, my love, I'm sure there's an explanation." David tried to sound conciliatory. "The explanation is that you're an idiot." Elena had completely dropped the mask. "How could you close the account today?" "Today?" And that's when I realized my son had planned this to happen exactly in front of Ethan and me. Elena had just revealed that she knew about the bank account being closed, which meant she had been monitoring David's finances much more closely than a normal fiancé would. Ethan had noticed it too. I could see it on his face. Confusion, then comprehension, then panic. "Elena," Ethan said carefully, "maybe we should—" "You shut your mouth." Elena turned on him like a viper. "This is your fault too, if you hadn't been so impatient. We would still have time." And there it was, the confession David had been waiting for, perfectly captured in front of the person who needed to hear it most. Me. Ethan had turned pale. Elena had realized what she'd just said. And David was smiling as if he'd just won the lottery. "Well," my son said with an unnerving calm, "this is getting interesting." The silence that followed was so tense I could hear the wall clock ticking in the living room. Elena had realized what she'd just said, and her face cycled through at least 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Shock, panic, anger, more panic, and finally a kind of desperate determination. "That's not what I meant," Elena said, trying to regain her composure. "I'm just stressed about the wedding and—" "Elena," David's voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "Stop right there." Ethan, meanwhile, looked like a trapped animal searching for a way out. His eyes darted between Elena, David, and me, clearly calculating what story he could invent to get out of this mess. "Carla," Ethan began, turning to me with that charming smile that I now saw exactly for what it was, "I think there's a misunderstanding here." "Oh, I think so too," I replied, and something in my tone made both Elena and Ethan look at me more attentively. "I think I've been misunderstanding a lot of things for the past 3 months." David walked closer to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, do you want to tell them what you saw in the kitchen 10 minutes ago, or would you prefer me to?" Elena turned so white I thought she was going to faint. What are you talking about?" I took out my phone and opened the photo gallery. "I'm talking about this." I showed them the photos I had taken of her and Ethan in their intimate moment. Ethan tried to grab my phone, but David was quicker and stepped between us. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Ethan." "Carla, I can explain," Ethan began, but I cut him off. "Oh, I'm sure you can. You probably have a very creative story prepared." I surprised myself with how calm my voice sounded. "But before you start with your explanations, let me share something with you." I walked toward Elena, who instinctively backed away. "Elena, dear, for these 2 years I've considered you the daughter I never had. I've advised you on the wedding. I've listened to you talk about your dreams. I even helped you choose the dress you apparently can no longer afford." Her eyes filled with tears, but they no longer moved me. "Carla, I'm not finished." My voice hardened. "I also lent David the money for the engagement ring he bought you. $25,000 for a ring that, as I understand it, you plan to sell immediately after the divorce you already had planned." Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I turned to Ethan. "And you, my dear Ethan, the man who has been courting me with flowers and romantic dinners while planning to marry me only to divorce me and take half of my assets." "That's not true," Ethan muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "No." David pulled his laptop from the office. "Because I have transcripts here of messages where Elena tells someone about the stupid old lady who's going to marry your boyfriend. I also have messages where that same person responds describing in detail how they plan to clean out the widow." Elena sank into a chair, finally defeated. "It wasn't personal, Carla." "It wasn't personal?" I laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Planning to steal everything my late husband worked to leave me wasn't personal?" "I needed the money." Elena exploded, and the truth finally came out. "Do you know what it's like to live constantly worried about money? Working horrible jobs for bosses who treat you like trash? You've had it easy your whole life." "Easy?" My voice rose several octaves. Do you think it was easy working double shifts as a nurse for 20 years while raising a son alone after his father abandoned us? Do you think it was easy caring for Robert for 2 years while he wasted away from cancer? Elena at least had the decency to look ashamed. And you? I turned to Ethan. What's your excuse? You also had a difficult life that justifies trying to scam a widow. Ethan straightened his shoulders, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man he truly was beneath all the charm. Carla, you're a smart woman. You know how the world works. Those who don't take opportunities get left behind. Ah, so I'm an opportunity. I nodded as if it were the most normal thing in the world. How romantic. David had been watching all of this with a fascinated expression. Hey, this is better than any reality show, but we have guests starting to arrive for what was supposed to be a wedding. I looked at my watch. He was right. In 30 minutes, 50 people would be here expecting a celebration. Well, I said, feeling strangely liberated now that all the cards were on the table. I guess we need to decide what we're going to tell the guests. I can fix this. Elena jumped out of her chair with renewed desperation. We can postpone the wedding, say someone got sick, and Elena, David cut her off. There is no wedding. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You can't do this. Elena was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. I've invested 2 years of my life in this relationship. 2 years. Yes, David nodded. 2 years planning how to rob me. It must have been exhausting. Ethan had been quiet during this exchange, clearly trying to find a way to save himself. Carla, he finally said, maybe we could make this work, forget what happened and start over. I looked at him for a long moment, allowing hope to bloom in his eyes before completely crushing it. Ethan, dear, there's one thing you need to understand about me. What? I smiled, and I know it wasn't a pleasant smile. I never ever forgive betrayal, and I never forget. It was at that moment the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the first guests. David rubbed his hands with apparent satisfaction. Perfect, just in time for phase 3. Phase 3? I asked. Oh, Mom. David winked. The fun is just beginning. The first to arrive were my sisters, Hope and Sandra, along with their husbands. I could hear their cheerful voices from the front entrance, commenting on how beautiful the backyard looked and how excited they were for the wedding. David, I whispered urgently, what exactly do you plan to do? You can't humiliate Elena in front of the whole family. Mom, relax. David adjusted his tie with a disconcerting calm. Everything is under control. Elena had regained some composure and was fixing her makeup with trembling hands. David, please, can we talk privately? I know we can resolve this. Elena, the only conversation we're going to have will be with my lawyers. David looked toward the front door, where more voices were heard. But first, we have a party to attend. Ethan grabbed my arm as I headed toward the door. Carla, this is crazy. Your son has gone insane. We didn't do anything wrong. I looked him directly in the eyes. Ethan, you just tried to convince me that planning to marry me to steal my inheritance is nothing wrong. Either you're more stupid than I thought, or you genuinely believe I'm an idiot. Carla. My sister Hope appeared in the hallway with outstretched arms. You're radiant, and this must be the famous Ethan. Ethan immediately switched to his charming mode, taking my sister's hand and kissing it gallantly. Hope, Carla has told me so much about you. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Hope practically melted. At 52, my sister had always been susceptible to masculine charm. Oh, Carla, what an elegant gentleman you found. If only she knew, I thought, watching Ethan work his magic on my sister. Where's the bride? Asked Sandra, appearing behind Hope. I want to see that dress you told us so much about. Elena had managed to recover her social smile. Sandra, so good to see you. I'm waiting until the last minute to change. Tradition, you know. It was a lie, of course. Elena hadn't changed because she couldn't afford the dress she had been showing off for weeks. More guests began to arrive. David's co-workers, some cousins, neighbors. The backyard quickly filled with elegantly dressed people, all expecting a celebration. David had hired a string quartet. There were tables with white tablecloths, and the makeshift altar in the backyard looked beautiful, with the flowers I had helped arrange that morning. Everything looked perfect for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. David, I murmured as I passed him. This is going to be a disaster. People are going to ask questions. Mom, trust me, I have this under control. 20 minutes later, when the backyard was full of guests chatting and sipping champagne, David stepped onto the small platform where the ceremony was supposed to take place. Attention, please. His voice cut through the conversations. Thank you all for coming today. I know you're here to celebrate my wedding to Elena, and I deeply appreciate you taking time out of your lives to be here. Elena stood near the altar, smiling nervously. She clearly didn't know what to expect, but she couldn't do anything without looking crazy. However, David continued, before we proceed with the ceremony, there's something important I need to share with all of you. The backyard fell silent. I could see confused faces among the guests. You see, 2 months ago, I discovered something very disturbing. I discovered that someone I trusted had been stealing money from my bank account. A murmur ran through the crowd. Elena had turned paper white. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some bank issue, but when I investigated further, I discovered that the theft was systematic and deliberate. David, Elena tried to interrupt, but he raised his hand. Please let me finish, Elena. His tone was completely civilized, but there was steel behind the words. I also discovered that this same person had been planning to divorce me immediately after the wedding to take half of my assets. The murmurs grew louder. I could see my sisters exchanging confused looks. But that's not all, David continued. This person had also conspired with another individual to scam my mother, planning to marry her for her money and then divorce her to steal her inheritance. Now the backyard was in complete silence, except for the sound of someone breathing heavily. It was Elena, who seemed to be on the verge of a panic attack. Elena, David turned to her. Do you have anything to say to our guests? Elena looked around the backyard, full of expectant faces. Her eyes desperately searched for a way out, a way to deny what she had just heard. She stammered. This is what, Elena? David pressed her. A lie? A misunderstanding? Because I have all the evidence right here. He took out his laptop and opened it on the table next to the altar. In fact, why don't we share some of your messages with everyone? No, Elena screamed, finally losing all composure. You can't do this. This is private. Private? David raised his eyebrows. Like the bank account you emptied was private? Like the plans you made to scam my mother were private? Elena turned to me with tears in her eyes. Carla, please stop this. I can explain everything. But I had had enough. Elena, dear, I said in the sweetest voice I could muster. I think it's time for our guest to know exactly what kind of woman was about to join our family. Elena looked around the backyard one last time. She saw all the expectant faces, and something in her finally broke. Fine, she shouted. Yes, I did it. I took the money, I planned the divorce, and you know what? I'm glad I did. The backyard erupted in gasps of shock and urgent conversations. But Elena wasn't finished. She turned to the guest with a wild look in her eyes. You all act like you're so perfect, like you've never done anything questionable for money. Well, I did in what I had to do to survive. My cousin Michael stood up from his chair. Elena, maybe you should... Don't tell me what I should do. Elena was completely out of control now. You all judge me, but none of you have lived my life. None of you know what it's like to be desperate. It was then that Ethan, who had been trying to disappear into the crowd, made the mistake of approaching Elena. Elena, calm down, he whispered urgently. You're making things worse. Elena turned on him like a beast. Making things worse? This is as much your fault as mine. And that's when the whole conspiracy publicly crumbled. If you hadn't been so greedy, we would have had more time. Elena yelled at Ethan in front of 50 witnesses. If you hadn't pushed so hard for me to convince Carla to marry you next month, none of this would have happened. The backyard fell into a stunned silence. Ethan looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. And me, I finally understood the brilliance of David's plan. He had orchestrated everything for Elena and Ethan to publicly destroy themselves in front of witnesses without him having to lift a finger. Well, David said in the silence that followed, I guess the wedding is canceled. The silence after Elena's public collapse lasted exactly 3 seconds before the whole family erupted in simultaneous conversations. My sisters rushed toward me. My cousins started shouting questions, and David's friends didn't know whether to leave or stay for the show. Silence My sister Hope's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Despite being the younger sister, she had always had a knack for commanding a room when necessary. "Carla, get over here right now." As I walked toward my sisters, who had grouped near the gift table like a protective pack, I could hear Elena sobbing and Ethan trying to explain to someone that it was all a misunderstanding. "Carla Hayes." Sandra grabbed my arm and with that expression she had perfected when we were kids, and I had done something that required a family meeting. "Explain exactly what's going on here." "It's complicated," I started, but Hope interrupted me. "No, it's not complicated. That man," she pointed toward Ethan, who was now being aggressively questioned by my cousin Michael. "Was he or was he not planning to scam you?" I sighed. There was no way to sugarcoat this. "Yes." "And that woman?" Sandra pointed toward Elena, who had found a chair and was hyperventilating. "Was she stealing money from David?" "Also yes." "And you knew about it?" Hope narrowed her eyes. "I found out an hour ago." My sisters exchanged one of those glances they had perfected over 50 years of being sisters. It was the kind of look that meant they were about to take control of the situation, whether I liked it or not. "All right." Hope stood up straight and adopted her general commander posture. "This is what's going to happen. Sandra, you take care of the guests, tell them there's a family emergency, but the food is still available. Michael," she yelled to our cousin, "stop questioning that man before he says something that can be used in court." "Court?" I asked. "Of course, court." Sandra looked at me as if it were obvious. "Do you think we're going to let these people walk away as if nothing happened, Carla? They tried to steal from you." "I'll handle that." David appeared next to us. "I already have everything documented to press charges." "Good." Hope nodded with approval. "And you," she pointed at me, "you're going to sit there and tell us everything from the beginning, without skipping any details." As my sister efficiently organized the chaos, something they had been doing for decades, I found myself observing this scene with a strange sense of detachment. There was Elena, crying in a chair, while Michael's wife gently offered her tissues and softly confronted her about how she could do this to a good family. There was Ethan, trapped in a corner by 3 of my cousins, who clearly wanted detailed answers about his intentions toward me. And there was David, moving through the backyard with a laptop under his arm, taking statements from the guests who had heard Elena's confession. "Carla," a soft voice interrupted my observations. I turned to see Mrs. Peterson, an older neighbor who had known Robert and me for years. "Dear, are you all right?" "I'm processing," I admitted. Mrs. Peterson sat in the chair next to mine. "You know, in my 75 years, I've seen a lot of family drama, but I've never seen anyone handle a situation like this with such elegance." "Elegance?" I laughed, but it sounded hysterical even to me. "Mrs. Peterson, I just discovered my boyfriend planned to marry me for money, and my future daughter-in-law has been stealing from my son." "Yes," she nodded wisely. "And instead of making a scene or hiding the truth, you allowed the truth to come out in front of the whole family. Now everyone knows exactly who these people are." I looked around the backyard. She was right. There was no way Elena or Ethan could deny what had happened here. 50 people had heard them confess. "Besides," Mrs. Peterson continued, "look at your son." I followed her gaze to David, who was talking to the string quartet, apparently explaining that they would still be paid in full even though there would be no ceremony. Even in the midst of all this chaos, he looked relieved. For the first time in months, my son looked genuinely happy. "That boy saved you," Mrs. Peterson said. "And he saved himself too." She was right. David had orchestrated all of this to protect both of us. He had sacrificed his wedding. He had risked looking like the villain, all to ensure that Elena and Ethan couldn't hurt us. "Carla," Hope appeared at my side again. "We need to make some practical decisions. What do we do with the food? And the string quartet? And are there any gifts we need to return?" Before I could answer, David approached us. "The practical decisions can wait," he said. "But there's something we need to do right now." "What?" "Elena is asking to speak with you privately. She says she has something important to confess." I looked toward where Elena was sitting, still surrounded by used tissues and disapproving family stares. "More confessions? What else could there be?" "I don't know." David shrugged. "But considering how the day has gone so far, you should probably hear what she has to say." "And Ethan?" "Ethan left." David smiled with satisfaction. Apparently, Michael and the cousin were persuasive enough to convince him that his presence was no longer welcome. I looked toward the corner where I had last seen Ethan. Sure enough, he was gone. He left, just like that? Oh, not just like that. Sandra appeared with an expression of satisfaction I hadn't seen since we were girls, and she had managed to make some boy who had hurt me pay for it. Michael explained very clearly that if he ever contacted you again, or if he approached any member of this family, he would have to answer to us. And what did he say? He said he understood perfectly and that we would never hear from him again. Hope smiled. Then he apologized profusely and practically ran to his car. For the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe completely. Ethan was gone. The immediate threat was over. But Elena is still here, David reminded me, and she says she needs to talk to you urgently. I looked toward Elena, who was now watching me with a desperate expression. All right, I sighed. Let's see what else she has to say. But as I walked toward Elena, I couldn't shake the feeling that the day's surprises were far from over. Elena had managed to compose herself enough to stop hyperventilating, but her eyes were still red and swollen. When I approached, she wiped her face with what must have been the 10th tissue and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Carla, please, I need to talk to you alone. I looked around the backyard where my family had managed to transform what should have been a total disaster into something resembling an impromptu family reunion. The string quartet had started playing background music. People were eating the canapes we had prepared for the reception, and my cousins were telling embarrassing stories about David as if this had been the plan all along. All right, I finally told her. 5 minutes. I took her to David's small study and closed the door. Elena immediately slumped into a chair and covered her face with her hands. Carla, there's something else you need to know. Of course there was. What now, Elena? The money I stole from David. She looked up, and I saw something new in her eyes, genuine remorse. It wasn't all for me. What does that mean? Elena took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. My younger brother, Jared, is sick. Pancreatic cancer. He needs treatments that insurance doesn't fully cover. I felt my irritation soften slightly, but not enough. Elena, that's terrible, but that doesn't justify. I know, she interrupted me. I know it doesn't justify it. But Carla, when you see your little brother deteriorating and you know there are treatments that could help him, but you don't have the money, she broke down again. I sat in the chair across from her. How much money did you take exactly? 75,000 children over the last 6 months. Her voice was barely a whisper. $40,000 went to Jared's treatments. The rest was because once I started, I couldn't stop. It was so easy, and David trusted me so much. And Ethan knew about your brother? Elena nodded miserably. It was his idea to involve you in the plan. He said if we both got married and then divorced, we could get enough money to pay for all of Jared's treatments and still have funds left over for us. Something cold settled in my stomach. Elena, how long have you been sick? She looked at me confused. I'm not sick, Carla. It's my brother who... No, I interrupted her. How long have you been mentally and emotionally sick? Because a sane person doesn't do what you did. Elena blinked several times as if the question had caught her by surprise. I don't understand. Elena, you didn't need to scam 2 families to help your brother. You could have talked to David about the situation. You could have asked for help. You could have been honest. I leaned forward. Instead, you chose to manipulate, lie, and steal. And then you chose to drag my family into your web of lies. But Jared is an excuse, Elena. A terrible excuse for terrible behavior. The coldness in my voice surprised even me. Do you know the difference between you and me? She shook her head. When Robert got sick with cancer, I worked double shifts for 2 years to pay for his treatments. I sold jewelry, I pawned things, I took out loans. But I never, not once, considered stealing from someone else. But you had options, Elena protested. You had a stable job. I had responsibilities, I corrected her. And I had values. 2 things you apparently decided to abandon. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. Carla, is there any way you can forgive me? Any way to fix this? I looked at her for a long moment. There was a part of me, the part that had been a nurse for 20 years, that wanted to help, that wanted to find a way to fix this broken situation. But there was a bigger part of me, the part that had learned the hard way that some people don't deserve second chances, that recognized Elena wasn't truly remorseful. She was desperate because she had been caught. "Elena," I finally said, "I'm going to do something for you." Her eyes lit up with hope. "I'm not going to press criminal charges against you." "Really? Carla, thank you. I'm not finished." My voice hardened. "I'm not going to press charges, but in return, you're going to do exactly what I tell you." Elena nodded eagerly. "Yes, anything." "First, you're going to pay back every dollar you stole from David. I don't care if you have to sell everything you own or work 3 jobs. Every single dollar." "Yes, of course." "Second, you will never contact David, me, or any member of this family again. Never. If you see us on the street, you will cross to the other side." Her face fell a little, but she nodded. "Third," I continued, "if I ever hear that you've tried to scam another family, I will move forward with the criminal case against you and I will make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of person you are." "I understand." "And Elena," I got up to leave, "if you really want to help your brother, find an honest job and take out a loan like decent people. Stop looking for victims to manipulate." I opened the door to leave, but Elena stopped me one last time. "Carla, can I ask you something?" "What?" "How did you know? How did you know I wasn't really remorseful?" I turned to look at her one last time. "Elena, in the last 5 minutes, you've given me 3 different versions of why you did what you did. First, it was financial desperation. Then it was because of your sick brother. Then it was because you had no other options." Elena looked confused. "People who are truly remorseful don't change their story every 5 minutes. Truly remorseful people take full responsibility without excuses." I opened the door completely. "You're still looking for a way to be the victim in your own story." I left the study and closed the door behind me, leaving Elena alone with her excuses. When I returned to the backyard, I found David waiting for me with a curious expression. "How did the final confession go?" "Your ex-fiancée," I told him. "She needs professional psychological help, but that's no longer our problem." David smiled. "You know what, Mom?" "What?" "I think this has been the best day of my life." I looked around the backyard where my family had turned what should have been a tragedy into a celebration, where the guests were laughing and eating as if this had been a planned family gathering, and then where my son was smiling at me with more happiness than I had seen in months. "You know what, David," I said, "I think you're right." But even as I said those words, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important was still pending, something about this situation that I wasn't seeing clearly, and as I would soon discover, that feeling was completely justified. The impromptu party had lasted until 8 in the evening. My sisters, with the military efficiency they had developed raising 14 children between the two of them, had managed to turn what should have been a social disaster into something resembling a successful family reunion. The guests left with stories to tell for years, and surprisingly, most seemed to have had fun. Elena had left silently around 6 after our conversations in the study. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, she simply took her bag and left. David had watched her go and merely shrugged. Now, as David and I cleaned up the last vestiges of the non-wedding, my son seemed more relaxed than I had seen him in months. He hummed as he stacked chairs, and there was a lightness in his movements that hadn't been there in a long time. "David," I said as we packed up the last of the dishes, "there's something bothering me." "What, all of this? Did you really plan every detail? How did you know Elena was going to explode exactly like that?" David stopped and looked at me with a strange expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you orchestrated everything perfectly. The timing of closing the bank account, the timing of confronting her in front of the guests, even the way Ethan and she destroyed each other. I studied it carefully. It's almost as if you had been manipulating this situation from the beginning." My son slowly sat down in one of the chairs we had just stacked. "Mom, there's something I haven't told you." A shiver ran down my spine. "What?" "I didn't discover Elena's affair by accident. I orchestrated it." David looked down at his hands. "What does that mean exactly?" "Elena wasn't stealing money at first. In the beginning, she really loved me." David looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. something cold. But I knew she wasn't strong enough to resist temptation if the right opportunity presented itself. My blood began to freeze. I deliberately let her have access to our accounts. I deliberately mentioned how much money you had saved. I deliberately put her in situations where she felt financially pressured. His voice was calm, almost clinical. I wanted to see if she was the person I suspected she was. And Ethan? Ah, Ethan was a gift. David smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. When Elena started stealing small amounts, I followed her. I saw when she met Ethan at that bar. I investigated his financial situation and realized he was perfect. Perfect for what? To destroy any possibility that Elena could manipulate you, just as she was trying to manipulate me. David stood up and walked toward the window. Ah, Elena wasn't just a troubled fiancée, Mom. She was dangerous. There was something about her, something that reminded me of Dad. My heart stopped. Robert had abandoned David and me when David was 7. He had taken our savings and disappeared with a woman 20 years younger. Elena had that same ability to make people trust her, David continued. That same ability to make you feel special while stealing everything you had. And when I saw how she was manipulating you too, I wasn't being manipulated by Elena. No, but you were being manipulated by Ethan. And Elena was part of that plan. David turned to me. Mom, do you really think it was a coincidence that Ethan appeared in your life exactly when Elena and I got engaged? The room started spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying Elena introduced you to Ethan specifically to rob you. David squeezed my hands. Remember where you met Ethan? At the grocery store. Which grocery store, Mom? I thought for a moment. The Whole Foods near Elena's house. And who suggested you go shopping there that particular day? The air left my lungs. Elena. Elena told me they had a special sale on. Elena put you in the right place at the right time so Ethan could meet you by chance. David squeezed my hands. Mom, they had planned this from the beginning. I sat down heavily, feeling as if the world had rearranged itself beneath my feet. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I needed you to react naturally when you saw them together. If you had been acting, they would have noticed. David sat across from me. And because I needed solid evidence of their plans, I couldn't risk them finding a way to escape the consequences. David, my voice sounded strange even to me. What else have you been planning? My son looked at me for a long moment before answering. Mom, do you trust me? After everything you've just told me, honestly, I'm not sure. David looked as if he had expected that answer. I understand, but there's one more thing you need to know. What? Elena isn't going to leave quietly, and Ethan definitely isn't going to leave quietly. David stood up and walked to his desk. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're going to try to take revenge. Revenge how? Well, David opened a drawer and pulled out another file. According to the messages I've been monitoring, Elena is already talking to a lawyer about suing for defamation, and Ethan apparently knows some people who aren't exactly respectable. I felt the panic begin to grow in my chest. What kind of people? The kind of people who have unconventional methods for collecting debts. David showed me a series of telephoto photographs. Ethan met with them last night. I looked at the photos, seeing Ethan talking to 2 men who definitely didn't look like bankers or lawyers. David, I whispered, what have you gotten us into? Don't worry, Mom. David smiled again, and this time the coldness in his smile frightened me more than everything that had happened during the day. I have unconventional friends too. What does that mean? It means, my son said, putting away the photographs, that the interesting part of this story is just beginning. That night I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the house made me jump. Every shadow on the window seemed menacing. David's words about the unconventional people Ethan knew echoed in my head, mixing with the growing understanding that my son had deliberately orchestrated this whole situation. At 3 a.m, I finally got up and went to the kitchen to make tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I heard the sound of a car parking outside. I looked out the window and saw a black car I didn't recognize. My heart sped up. I took my phone to call David, but before I could dial, the front door opened silently. Mom, it's me. David's voice came from the entrance. Everything's fine. David, what are you doing here at 3 a.m? My son appeared in the kitchen, but he wasn't alone. A tall, thin man, dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive even in the dim kitchen light, accompanied him. Mom, let me introduce you to Gabe Mendez. Gabe, this is my mother, Carla. Gabe greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Hayes, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. David has told me a lot about you. Gabe is David paused as if choosing his words carefully. A consultant specializing in solving complicated problems. The water started to boil, the whistle filling the tense silence in the kitchen. I turned off the stove with slightly trembling hands. What kind of problems? I asked, although a part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. The kind of problems you have when people like Elena and Ethan decide they aren't going to accept the consequences of their actions. Gabe replied. His voice was soft, but with an edge that made me shiver. David walked closer to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Mom, this afternoon, after everyone left, Elena went to the police. To the police? My confusion must have been obvious. I thought we had agreed not to press charges. She didn't go to confess, Gabe interrupted. She went to accuse David of emotional extortion and you of conspiring to deliberately ruin her life. I felt my legs weaken. That's ridiculous. We didn't. Of course it's ridiculous, David reassured me. But Elena is very convincing when she wants to be. And apparently Ethan accompanied her with his own version of events. Gabe sat down, uninvited, in one of my kitchen chairs. According to their account, you and David conspired to set a trap for them. Elena said you knew about her sick brother and deliberately put her in a desperate financial situation so you could blackmail her. That's a total lie. It is. Gabe nodded calmly. But it's a smart lie. Elena presented medical documents for her brother, records of medical expenses, and a very detailed account of how David supposedly manipulated her into stealing money. David sat across from Gabe. Tell her the rest. Gabe looked directly at me. Ethan claims you deliberately seduced him only to humiliate him publicly when he refused your inappropriate advances. What? My voice came out as a scream. That is absolutely a lie, Gabe finished calmly. But a plausible lie, if you don't know the real facts. I sat down slowly, feeling like I was in a nightmare that got stranger with every passing moment. What do they want? Money? Oh, they definitely want money. Gabe smiled, and this time the smile was genuine, though not reassuring. Elena is suing for emotional damages, defamation, and loss of future income. Ethan is suing for damage to his reputation and emotional distress. How much? $2 million from you, $3 million from David. The figure hit me like a slap. We don't have that kind of money. They know exactly how much money you have, Davy said grimly. Elena had access to all my financial information for 2 years. She knows exactly how much my business is worth, how much you have saved, how much the house is worth. Gabe leaned forward. But here's the interesting thing. They're not looking to go to trial. They're looking for a quick settlement. Why? Because, Gabe smiled again, they know that if this goes to trial, all the evidence David has collected will come to light. The messages, the bank transfers, the detailed plans to scam both of you, they can't risk that. David looked directly at me. Mom, they want us to pay them to disappear. It's blackmail, basically. And if we refuse? Gabe and David exchanged a look. If you refuse, Gabe said slowly, Elena and Ethan have made it very clear they will do everything possible to destroy your reputations. Elena has a very convincing story about being a desperate young woman, victimized by a wealthy, vengeful family. And Ethan, David added, has apparently been spreading rumors that you are a crazy, desperate widow who seduces younger men. I felt the rage begin to replace the shock. So we have to pay them for trying to rob us? No, Gabe stood up. You don't have to pay them anything. What do you mean? Gabe adjusted his shirt cuffs, a gesture that was somehow more menacing than anything he had said so far. I mean, there are other ways to solve this problem. Gabe, David stood up too. Maybe you should explain exactly what kind of services you offer. Gabe looked at me for a long moment before answering. Mrs. Hayes, I specialize in making problematic people remember why it's better to behave civilly. And how exactly do you do that? His smile this time was absolutely cold. That depends on how problematic they decide to be. As I looked at these two men in my kitchen, my son, who had been manipulating events for months, and this stranger who spoke of solving problems in ways that clearly weren't legal, I realized the situation had escalated far beyond anything I could have imagined. "David," I said slowly, "exactly what have you become?" My son looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I became someone who protects his family, Mom, no matter the cost." And as Gabe nodded in approval, I knew with terrible certainty that things were about to get much, much worse. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on my patio, drinking morning coffee and reading the local newspaper, when I saw a small note in the brief news section that made me smile. Elena Vasquez, 28, voluntarily turned herself into authorities yesterday to confess to the theft of $75,000 from her ex-fiancé. In a surprising statement, Vasquez admitted to fabricating false evidence in a subsequent attempt at extortion and asked for forgiveness from the affected family. Her accomplice, Ethan Miller, had apparently left town that same morning. I folded the newspaper and placed it on the table next to my coffee. Through the kitchen window, I could see David making breakfast, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. The resolution of the problem with Elena and Ethan had been surprisingly simple once Gabe had gotten involved. There was no violence. There were no explicit threats. According to Gabe, he had simply had very direct conversations with both of them about the realities of trying to extort people who had the resources to defend themselves. Elena had received a visit from Gabe and two of his associates 3 days after filing her false complaint. They had shown her additional evidence David had collected, including audio recordings of her admitting her plans, and had very clearly explained what the legal consequences of continuing her defamation campaign would be. Ethan, apparently, had required a more persuasive conversation. Gabe never gave me specific details, but 2 days after their talk, Ethan had packed his few belongings and left town without telling anyone. "Good morning, Mom." David appeared on the patio with 2 plates of scrambled eggs. "Anything interesting in the paper?" "Just a small note about an unexpected confession," I replied, accepting the plate. "Does Gabe keep you informed about these developments?" David sat across from me with a carefully neutral expression. Gabe is very efficient in his communication methods. We ate in silence for a few minutes, enjoying the morning sun and the sound of birds in the backyard. It was hard to believe that just 2 weeks earlier, this same backyard had been the scene of one of the most dramatic explosions I had ever witnessed. "David," I finally said, "I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Of course." "Did you really orchestrate all of this to protect me? Or was there something more?" My son put his fork down on the plate and looked directly at me. "Do you want the answer that will make you feel better, or do you want the truth?" "The truth? Always the truth." David nodded slowly. "At first, yes. It was just about protecting you and me. Elena had issues. Ethan was clearly a con man. And I wanted to expose them before they could hurt us." "At first?" "But the more I investigated, the more I saw the depth of their plan." David paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mom, they weren't just opportunistic scammers. They were predators." "Had they done this before?" I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "Gabe investigated their backgrounds more deeply after they tried to extort us." David handed me an envelope that had been on the table. "Elena wasn't just a woman desperate for her brother's medical money. Her brother is fine. The medical documents were fake." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were copies of investigative reports, photographs, official documents. "Elena has been executing versions of this scam for 5 years," David continued as I read. "She always targets single men with some money. She always has a tragic story prepared. She always has an accomplice." "And Ethan?" "Ethan has been married 4 times. Each marriage ended with him emptying his wife's bank accounts and disappearing." David pointed to one of the pages. "His first wife committed suicide after he left her with nothing." I felt nausea rising in my stomach. My God. "So yes, Mom. In the end, this became personal in a way I hadn't expected." David stood up and walked to the patio railing. "They weren't just robbing us. They had been destroying lives for years. And now Elena is in jail, where she can't hurt anyone else. And Ethan?" David shrugged. "Gabe says sometimes people like Ethan just need a reminder that the world is bigger than they think, and there are consequences for their actions." I leaned back in my chair, processing everything I had just learned. Do you feel guilty? Why would I feel guilty? For everything. For manipulating the situation, for involving Gabe, for... I gestured vaguely toward the newspaper. All of this. David turned to me, with an expression I recognized from when he was little and had done something he knew was right, even if it had caused trouble. Mom, do you remember when I was little and Dad abandoned us? Of course. Do you remember what you told me when I cried because I couldn't protect you from him? I thought for a moment. I told you it wasn't your responsibility to protect me, that you were just a child. And then you said something else. I closed my eyes, remembering. I told you that someday, when you were older, you could choose to be the kind of man who protects the people he loves. Exactly. David walked over and took my hand. Mom, I could never protect you from Dad because I was too young. But Elena and Ethan, I could stop them. I looked at my son, this man who had grown up without a father, who had become someone willing to do things I never would have imagined, all to protect the family he had left. You don't regret anything? David considered the question seriously. I regret that Elena chose to be what she is. I regret that Ethan hurt so many women before he got to you. I regret that the world is the kind of place where sometimes you need people like Gabe to get justice. But I don't regret protecting you. And I don't regret making sure Lena and Ethan can't hurt other families. We stayed in silence for a while, drinking coffee and looking at the backyard where everything had begun just 2 weeks ago. Finally, I asked, wait, what happens now? Now, David smiled. And this time it was the smile of the son I had raised, not the cold strategist who had emerged during this crisis. Now we go back to being a normal family. Well, relatively normal. And Gabe. Gabe is there if we need him, but hopefully we won't. I took a sip of my coffee and looked at my son, this man who had turned out to be much more complex and capable than I had imagined. David, there's something I need you to know. What? I'm proud of you. His smile widened. Even after all this? Especially after all this. I stood up and hugged him. You're right. Sometimes the world requires you to do difficult things to protect the people you love. And I'm grateful to have a son who's willing to do those difficult things. As I hugged David on the patio of the house I had been about to lose to scammers, I thought about how strange life's twists are. 3 weeks ago, I was a lonely widow who thought she had found love again. Now I was a woman who had learned that sometimes the family you have is fiercer and more protective than you ever imagined. And while I never would have chosen to go through this experience, I couldn't deny that there was something deeply satisfying in knowing that Elena and Ethan had finally faced the consequences of years of hurting innocent people. Justice, it turns out, sometimes comes in forms you never expect. And sometimes that's exactly the way it should be.